Hello there. At noon on November 9th, 2018, the police in Yangtu District, Jiangxi City, Chongqing Province received a phone call from a fisherman on the riverbank. The person had discovered a floating body on the surface of the Yangtu River. The police immediately arrived at the scene upon receiving the report. At this time, it was the end of the rainy season and transitioning into the first month of the dry season, so the water level was still high. In the section of the river where the body was found, the water had risen close to the edge of the road and the body belonged to a middle-aged woman of short stature but proportional build. Currently, the victim's body is floating face up on the water. What is particularly notable is that the victim's shoulders to thighs are tightly bound with ropes, meaning the ropes were wrapped around the body to firmly press the hands against the thighs. The woman has dark hair and is not wearing any clothes. A crowd has gathered on the riverbank and there is much discussion. Therefore, the police have sealed off the area to facilitate investigation and search for evidence at the crime scene. When the police brought the body ashore, there was a horrifying discovery as the victim's body had been severely mutilated and appeared gruesome. There was a deep cut on the victim's head, multiple wounds on the arms indicating signs of resistance. The most shocking thing was that the abdomen to the buttocks had been cut into small pieces. The police conducted a search in the vicinity but did not find the severed flesh of the victim. To clarify the case, the first and highest priority for the police is to determine the identity of the deceased. However, there were no clothes or personal documents on the body, which made it difficult for the investigating authorities to identify the victim at the crime scene. During the preliminary examination of the victim's body, it was observed that the victim had smooth and uncalloused skin on the hands, indicating that she was not engaged in heavy physical labor. Additionally, the victim was wearing a gold necklace depicting a sitting Buddha on a lotus pedestal and gold earrings, indicating that she possessed at least moderate wealth. Strangely, the victim's belongings remained intact and were not stolen, leading the police to deduce that this was likely not a robbery. To determine the cause of the victim's death, the investigative authorities must rely on the results of the autopsy. The victim was estimated to be around 45 years old and approximately 1.42 meters tall. Based on the degree of decomposition of the body, the forensic doctors concluded that the victim had died and been submerged in water about a week prior. The face, torso, arms, and legs of the victim had multiple injuries with varying degrees of trauma, and most of these wounds appeared to have occurred while the victim was still alive. The forensic doctors concluded that the wounds on the victim's body could be divided into two time frames, those inflicted before and after death. The investigative authorities further classified the wounds into two types. The first type consisted of wounds caused by sharp objects such as a knife, while the second type consisted of wounds caused by blunt objects such as a stick or abrasions. It is noteworthy that the number and nature of the wounds on the victim's body posed difficulties even for experienced forensic doctors in determining the actual cause of death within a short period. After a day of careful examination, the forensic report concluded that the victim had died from 6 deep stab wounds in the abdominal area penetrating the abdominal artery. These stab wounds sequentially pierced through the small intestine, liver, and stomach. Additionally, there were other cutting wounds on the body, and the victim's abdomen and buttocks were cut after her death. These cutting wounds were relatively smooth and flat, indicating that the perpetrator's intention was either to dispose of the body or to vent their anger on the victim. Furthermore, there were 3 deep chop wounds in the middle of the victim's shin, but they were not severed. Each chop wound was approximately 2 centimeters deep into the shin bone, and these 3 wounds were relatively close to each other, about 0.5 centimeters apart. This suggests that the crime was committed in a very private or secluded space. Based on the jewelry found on the victim's body, the police speculated that the perpetrator may have had a romantic relationship with the victim. The initial crime scene could have been inside a house, but since the victim's identity was unknown, it was challenging to narrow down the search for the murderer. To determine the victim's identity, the authorities interviewed people in the area and investigated the location where the perpetrator disposed of the body, the time of disposal, and proposed hypotheses about the body's drift based on the river's flow. Special forces expanded the investigation radius to about 100 kilometers and sought assistance from other units to identify the victim from the national database. Finally, they found a fingerprint sample that closely matched the victim's fingerprints. This fingerprint belonged to a woman named Wu Maofin, 43 years old, who had a criminal record related to an assault case. To confirm the victim's identity, the police conducted a thorough comparison and ultimately confirmed that the deceased person was Wu Maofin. So what was the reason behind this woman's previous conviction? It turns out that Fien used to live with an elderly man in his 70s who financially supported her, sparking much discussion among the neighbors in the area. One day, while passing by a neighbor's gate, Fien overheard some unfavorable comments about herself from a group of neighbors gathered in front of the yard. Feeling angry, and with her hot-tempered nature, Fien engaged in an argument and chaos ensued between them. Both parties refused to back down, leading to a physical altercation. The other person was seriously injured and had to be hospitalized, while Wu Mao Fien was convicted of intentional bodily harm. This incident occurred about 3 years ago. After gathering basic information and identifying the victim, the police went to Fien's house to investigate her social relationships. During the investigation, they discovered that the woman had complex relationships. Currently, Fien was living with her mother and her brother Wu Yufeng. According to archived records, Fien's brother had contacted the police several times in recent years, and the reasons were related to incidents where she had assaulted people. Fien not only attacked outsiders, but also physically harmed family members. Although Wu Mao Fien was of short stature, measuring less than 1.5 meters, she had a fiery temper and often acted excessively when attacking others. It had been over a week since Fien's death, and no one had reported the incident to the police. This indicated that the relationships between the family members were highly strained, prompting the police to visit Wu Mao Fien's house to uncover the truth. At that moment, her brother was not present, and only her mother was sitting in the outer room. However, due to old age, her mother was both mute and deaf, making it impossible for the police to communicate with her. The investigators had no choice but to search for leads inside Wu Yufeng's house. When they arrived, they found the house in disarray with a makeshift tent and a pile of straw in the yard. This tent was where Fien stayed whenever she returned, as the house lacked a proper door and was covered only by a thick, dark brown cloth to block direct sunlight from entering the sleeping area. According to the police records, both Fien and Feng have had numerous conflicts and have been involved in several fights. In front of Wu Yufeng's house, there is a small road that is only 200 meters away from the Yangtu River. The police began to suspect Fien's older brother, and if there was any conflict during the fight that resulted in her death, it would be very convenient to dispose of the body just 200 meters away. Therefore, the police decided to interrogate Wu Yufeng directly to observe his attitude and gather more information about Fien's relationship. Facing the police interrogation, he appeared very calm and natural. He told the police that his younger sister had no close relationship with the family and would often disappear for weeks or even months without contacting the family. He knew nothing about her work and life, but Feng knew that Fien had a boyfriend named Tongdat Liu, and the two had broken up and gotten back together many times. Although they had no intention of getting married, they often had conflicts and arguments. The most recent incident occurred when Fien returned to visit her mother and spoke to her using gestures to indicate that Tongdat Liu had been abusive towards her. Wu Yufeng has a hot temper, so when he found out that his sister was being bullied, he became angry and continuously cursed. Liu, who was also angry, immediately dragged Fien away. Feng not only answered the investigators' questions fluently, but also honestly admitted that he and his sister often argued and fought without hesitation. In fact, this is contrary to the psychology of suspected murderers, because they often have to appear to have a good relationship with the victim or even show sympathy to conceal their criminal motives. However, in Feng's case, it was the opposite, which made the police think that if he were truly the killer, his mental state would not be stable. At this point, the police intentionally mentioned Feng's residence near the Yangtu River to gauge his reaction, but Feng did not avoid the issue and openly discussed it with the police. He even pointed out that this road was the shortest route, and only 200 meters away from the Yangtu River, which is completely inconsistent with the typical mindset of a murderer. Therefore, although the police initially suspected him, they found no evidence such as bloodstains or disturbance in Fien's tent or his house. As a result, they temporarily set aside their suspicions about Wu Yufeng. Subsequently, the police changed their focus and began investigating Tongdat Liu, the boyfriend of Wu Mao Fien. Although Fien and Liu had been dating for many years, Feng had no contact information for Liu. He only knew that Liu often brought Fien home on a motorcycle when they visited their mother. However, he later remembered that Fien had borrowed his eldest daughter's phone to call Liu, so his phone number was still recorded in the log. When the police obtained Liu's phone number, they found his address in Sichuan. They used this phone number to gather further information about him, but when they found Tongdat Liu, he stated that he and Wu Mao Fien had broken up. In late October, Fien returned to Chongqing without contacting him, and he had no information about her since then. The police investigated from street cameras and information from toll stations. They determined that Wu Mao Fien had purchased a train ticket to Lishan, Sichuan, in mid-October 2018. However, there were no records indicating that she had returned from Lishan to Chongqing. The police suspected whether the victim had been killed in Leshan because her body was found on the Yangtu River, and Leshan was the upper source of this river branch. It is possible that Wu Maofian was murdered in Sichuan, and then the perpetrator threw the body into the upper source of the river to let it flow downstream to Chongqing. Although Leshan is the source of the river, the waterway is hundreds of kilometers away. According to the report from forensic doctors, the victim's time of death was approximately 1 week ago. Whether it's the end of the rainy season or the beginning of the dry season, the water flow is still strong and large. However, in such a short period of time, the body cannot float from Leshan to Chongqing. It is very difficult for a corpse to be carried by the water back to its hometown, both in terms of physics and probability. According to the testimony of Tongdat Liu, he brought Fian to Chongqing on October 30th. The police also checked surveillance videos on the highway from Leshan to Chongqing and found that Tongdat Liu had ridden a motorcycle to Chongqing. The police collected clues from there and continued to investigate to find out what happened after Tongdat Liu brought Wu Maofin to Chongqing. However, they discovered that after Tongdat Liu brought Wu Maofin to Chongqing, he returned to Leshan on the same day and did not leave the area during the time of the incident. According to the telecommunications report, Wu Maofin's phone was still active until November 2nd, including messages and calls to her acquaintances, so Tongdat Liu had no opportunity to commit the crime. Based on the above evidence, the police ruled out suspicion against Tongdat Liu. After ruling out Tongdat Liu as a suspect, the investigation reached a dead end. At this point, the police continued to investigate to find out who might have a complex relationship with the victim. According to the telecommunications report, there were many people who had close relationships with her. On the evening of November 1st, Wu Maofin's phone suddenly lost signal, and it was also discovered that the last image of her was captured by a surveillance camera in the area at 17:07 on November 1st, 2018. The police also discovered that 2 people were in frequent contact with Fian before she was murdered. One person was a woman named Qin Li, and the other was a man named Liang Ni. Initially, the police focused on investigating the man with the surname Liang, and through the investigation, they found that Liang Ni owned a local tea shop which Fian often visited to play chess. When the police began investigating Liang Ni, they found that he had a very simple life and frequently stayed at the tea shop. Since there were cameras in the shop, it was easy to determine that from the afternoon of November 1st to the afternoon of November 2nd, Liang Ni did not leave the shop. Therefore, Liang Ni had no opportunity to commit the crime, and the police excluded him from the list of suspects and turned their attention to the woman named Qin Li, a close friend of Fian. As mentioned earlier, the forensic report on the victim's leg wounds stated that there were 3 stab wounds that penetrated the bone, with each wound 0.5 centimeters apart. This clearly indicates that the perpetrator wanted to sever this part of the body but was not strong enough to do so, hence giving up. Therefore, the police suspected that the perpetrator could be a woman or a man with poor physical strength. Qin Li and Wu Maofin had previously rented a house together before Fian was murdered. Therefore, the police believed that if Qin Li was not the perpetrator, she would still play an important role in the investigation because she had a lot of contact with the victim. So the police went to the place where Qin Li and Fian rented the house together, but did not find Qin Li. It was then that the police discovered that Qin Li had moved out and left the house 3 days earlier. After successfully contacting Qin Li during the interrogation, she told the investigators what she knew. On the evening of November 1st, Wu Maofian left the house they rented together. Qin Li knew that Fian was going to the town of Bisha in West District and would not return until the next morning. She also tried to contact Fian several times but was unsuccessful. Based on the testimony of Qin Li and information gathered from other sources, the police have ruled out suspicions regarding Qin Li, but they have also obtained important leads. Fian had multiple complex relationships and numerous boyfriends, but her relationships with these individuals were highly unusual. Some relationships lasted a long time, while others only lasted a few months or even weeks before she left. Fian once borrowed Qin Li's phone to contact a man in Bisha town because her phone ran out of credit and she couldn't top it up. However, Qin Li didn't know who this man was. The police obtained the man's mobile phone number from Qin Li's phone, and after investigating, they discovered that the owner of the phone number was named Tu Yutian. The police initiated an investigation and found that Tu Yutian lived in Bisha town, Jiangxi district, which perfectly matched the information provided by Qin Li. At this point, there was a high suspicion surrounding Tu Yutian, and they believed that the case was about to be resolved. However, when the police saw Tian, they realized that he was paralyzed and lying in bed in a prolonged paralytic condition. He could only speak a few simple words and spoke very slowly. With such poor health and disability without any other external evidence, it was evident that Tian was innocent. Based on the information that the victim frequently communicated with another person who used his identity card to register that phone number, but no one knew who that person was, an older police officer had a familiar feeling when looking at the suspect's phone number but couldn't remember where it had appeared before. He decided to check this phone number in the records of the cases he was managing and discovered that it belonged to the father of a repeat offender who had been involved in illegal fishing and the poaching of protected animals. The mobile phone was registered by the offender's father during the trial, and when he visited relatives in prison, his name was Tu-Ming Yang. The police decided to go to Tu-Ming Yang's house to conduct a search and interrogation. When the police arrived at Yang's house, the first person they encountered in the yard was his mute son. This mute person continuously gestured with his hands and feet, as if trying to report something to the investigators, but because he didn't know sign language, it was difficult to understand what he was trying to convey. The investigators speculated that the mute person was attempting to express that Tu-Ming Yang had killed someone in the bedroom and then transported the body to the river using a cart. As the police approached the house, they found the door locked, but the TV inside was still on, and despite the police calling for Yang several times, he didn't open the door. The police decided to break in and quickly apprehended Tu-Ming Yang right on the spot while he was lying on the messy bed. The room was pitch dark and disorderly, prompting Yang's initial terrified reaction of shouting, "It's not me! It's not me!" When questioned further, he could only stutter that it wasn't him and that he didn't know anything else. The police decided to continue searching Tu-Ming Yang's house. In the kitchen area, where many kitchen utensils were hanging, they discovered some dark red marks on the wall. However, upon examination, it turned out to be paint marks rather than blood. When the police asked Yang why he was using a phone registered under the name Tu Yu Tian, he immediately trembled, sat down on the ground, and explained that there was a time when he accidentally found Tian's identification card while visiting his paralyzed cousin, who was Tu Yu Tian. As his cousin had no need for a phone, Tu-Ming Yang registered a different phone number for himself using his cousin's ID card as proof. When questioned about Wu Mao Fin, Yang revealed that they had a vague relationship primarily based on exchanging money for affection. Due to the difficulties in life and raising his deaf-mute son, Yang did not have the means to remarry after his wife passed away. Therefore, he and Fin had a relationship to fulfill their physical needs. When multiple individuals knocked on his door claiming to be the police, Yang panicked and believed it was related to his son's case, so he did not dare to open the door and stated that it was unrelated. When the police informed Yang that Fin was dead and her last known location was the town of Bisha, where he was residing, Yang confessed that Fin came there not only to meet him, but also another man named Su Yu Qian. Qian had a similar personal situation as Tu-Ming Yang, and sought out Fin for transactions. Subsequently, the police quickly went to Su Yu Qian's house to investigate. Initially, they asked Qian if he knew about Fin's death, but he immediately denied it and claimed not to know anyone named Wu Mao Fin. On the table in his house, his mobile phone was still charging, and when the police checked it, they found Fin's phone number in Su Yu Qian's contact list. Furthermore, suspicious dark gunshot marks were found near the bed in his house, and the police discovered half of the victim Fin's fingerprint on the light switch panel. The test results confirmed that the bloodstains belonged to the victim Wu Mao Fin. With such clear evidence, Su Yu Qian confessed that he had killed Fin. According to Su Yu Qian's account, the incident occurred on the morning of November 1st, when Fin came to the town of Bisha and visited Tu-Ming Yang's house to conduct a transaction. Afterward, Fin went to Su Yu Qian's house, but the two had a dispute over the price. Previously, the price was 500 yuan, but this time Fin updated it to 600 yuan. In practice, when using any service, if there is a price adjustment, they must inform the customer either verbally or in writing. In this case, Fin completed the transaction before updating the price for the customer, which angered him. He remarked that at over 40 years old, Fin's appearance was not worth 600 yuan. Naturally, women tend to be sensitive when criticized about their appearance and age, especially when receiving negative comments from others. Fin, a hot-tempered woman, attacked Qian when he mentioned this issue. Subsequently, an argument ensued between the two. Qian became angry, pushed Fin off the bed onto the floor, and then used a knife to attack her until she died. Regarding the injuries such as skin tears on the victim's buttocks and abdomen, Qian explained that his initial intention was to dismember the body into smaller parts and throw them into the river to cover up the evidence. However, when he tried to cut the flesh, he couldn't separate the leg bones, and he didn't have any other tools to solve this problem. Therefore, he decided to keep Fin's body intact. When he calmed down, it was already 2 a.m., so he decided to throw Fin's body and her personal belongings into the Yangtu River. Since the body was still soft whenever he laid it down, Fiend's hands would fall straight to the ground. Therefore, he used a stick placed behind her and tightly tied a rope around her hands, wrapping it around her body like a mummy. He then tied it to a car and drove away. On July 21, 2020, the Chongqing Intermediate People's Court pronounced a verdict on Su Yu Qian, charging him with intentional homicide and sentencing him to death with a 2-year waiting period before execution. From a life perspective, this story also teaches us a lesson to avoid troubles, which is that everything should always be clear, from emotional matters to financial transactions. How do you feel about today's case? Leave a comment so we can discuss. And if you liked it, don't hesitate to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support us. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.